Hello, this is Luisa Soto, and I'll be presenting my BIO103 Principles of Biology final project. So, the area that I actually chose to do is not the Fremont, Nebraska area. I'll actually be covering the wildlife preservation that I want to be doing is in White Oak, Texas, which is my hometown. So, yeah. So, some background knowledge about White Oak or the White Oak area is that it is it's a growing town, has about 10,000, people in it, heavily vegetated, hilly, very humid, and then some natural animals and some animals that I want to be covering are specifically I want to help deer and like the ever growing depopulation of deer. So that's what I'll be covering. Those are the animals that I want to be helping within this wildlife preservation. So White Oak is located in East Texas, as I stated. It is about an hour from the Louisiana border, and then about 2.5 to 3 hours from the Dallas city area. So this is a normal map. I'll actually won't be covering all of White Oak. I'll be covering a small little portion, as you'll see in a minute here. But yeah, this is the map. As I stated earlier, it is pretty hilly, has rolling hills. East Texas is very hilly, and then it'll be flat, but for the most part, it is pretty elevated. And then, as I stated earlier, it is a growing little town. So, a lot of vegetation is still there, but slowly it is going down. The main thing we have within White Oak is the school system. Our school system is actually the center of the whole town, and the area that I'll be covering was actually part of a huge pond. White Oak High School was built on top of a pond in the early 1910s. And yeah, so it was built on top of a huge pond. The high school, the middle school, the school administration building, the intermediate, and our stadium was all built on top of a pond and is all in the middle area of town. So the area that I want to be covering is actually, we'll see in this video, is actually behind the intermediate. And it is a little bit further behind. I know about this area because I grew up here and I ran cross country in middle school and high school, and so I know this area pretty well. It's heavily vegetated, very woodsy, and you'll actually see a lot of its natural animals. And the animal that I will be including is deer. There was a shortage of deer about a few years ago in the White Oak area and in East Texas. And as you know, that can be really damaging to the whole ecosystem, the whole area in general. And so I want to help with, preserving that animal and helping it, repopulate and regrow. So yeah, basically, I'm outlining here in red the area that I want to do. And as I stated, it's behind the school district, the intermediate. I circled the areas that it is by. It's by a church, and then it is by a street, and on the other side of the street is the White Oak High School baseball fields. So it's slightly in contact with human population, but not much. So next slide. So for water sources in this specific area and in White Oak overall, there are small rivers and creeks as well as small ponds, and then nearby lakes that surround the town, and other towns that are surrounded by White Oak. Some in this specific area, there's only creeks and rivers. Rivers is a stretch, that's why I'm saying creeks. So that is for water sources. As for food sources, natural vegetation and other animals being birds mainly, little mice, rats. I've seen some foxes as well, and vegetation. Artificial would just be any type of human trash, human food, and also feed, that you could also feed the animals. Coverage. So there's a lot of coverage in this specific area of East Texas. Woods are very heavy, as well as vegetation. Within the area, there's a lot of woods. This is kind of an untouched place in White Oak, and so the abundance of trees is very high. East Texas, which is where White Oak is located, has an abundance of all types of trees. It is able to naturally keep alive pine trees, oaks, and many more pretty well. The area is very successful with the different types of trees because the amount of rain the area gets, which also has a good amount of moisture. It's a pretty humid place, and so growing trees, growing plants is pretty easy as long as you have that rain. I want to say that it rains probably once a week, and for sure at least once every 2 weeks. Within the past few years, it's rained a lot more than what I remember. So what's the exact plan? So as you see in the area, there was some oil rigs, and I basically, sorry. So what the plan is, so wildlife corridors. This would allow for movement of wildlife along its natural range without exposure to human interference. So we'd actually make the corridor a little bit smaller than what we stated, and that is because we don't want any human interference. We want them to naturally leave, and we would actually view the animal through its natural through cameras that we'd set up within the woods. We'd also create more water resources. We plant and give more food resources for deer, and then we'd allow for a natural entrance into wildlife, and this would be outside of town or outside of the White Oak area. So a little video of that. As you can see here, the yellow, I didn't talk about this in the past video, but the yellow are actual oil rigs. We take those out before the animals actually entered into the corridor, and then we would actually put in the ponds, and we'd allow for vegetation to grow before the animals were into it, just because we do not want to have any human interference. We want these animals to be as natural in a sense to how they are. We don't want to spook them, we don't want to scare them. We just want to help them to repopulate. And so again, they would actually leave on the right side instead of the left side. Left side is more houses. Right side is basically no houses at all. And so they'd leave closer to the pond in that street. And then on the other side of the street is a lot of vegetation and natural woods. So, that is my presentation.